Today I'm going to present to you fad diets. Do they work? We're going to talk about some of the characteristics of a fad diet, and then I'm going to go over 3 specific fad diets in detail, the Whole30, intermittent fasting, and the ketogenic diet. Those are 3 that I get asked about probably the most frequently, and so I did some research, came up with some pros and cons, and kind of looked at the research behind it, the literature. So, have you ever heard that diets don't work? You heard that term? Yeah. But we do it anyway, don't we? Often over and over again, just trying to lose some weight. And today about 40% of the population is categorized in the obese category. It's estimated that 97 million Americans are actively dieting at any one point in time. But it's not working. The obesity rates keep climbing, not just in adults, but in children. We're seeing this across all life stages in both men and women. And in the meantime, the diet industry keeps pumping out more books and diet plans and supplements and foods to buy and programs to join. But the research tells us, unfortunately, only about 5% of people who engage in a diet program actually will lose weight and keep it off. Most people will gain the weight they lost back within about 3 to 5 years. So not that great of a success rate. When fad diets emerge, we tend to get a little confused because oftentimes they have kind of conflicting recommendations or advice, and we are not sure what's good for us, what's not good for us, what we should be eating. Some of the characteristics of fad diets that I've identified: number 1, they usually offer weight loss that is quick and easy. They make it sound so good. They offer kind of dramatic and sometimes almost miraculous results. I see patients lose weight on these programs, maybe in the short term, but gain it back once they stop eating that way. One of the characteristics of most fad diets is they have kind of strict lists of foods that are okay to eat, and then a list of foods that you should never eat. Often they are coupled with or recommend various supplements that you have to purchase or special foods, and a lot of times these are kind of expensive and, in my opinion, often unnecessary. If somebody is dieting and trying to lose weight, I think a general multivitamin is a good idea, but you really shouldn't require any other additional supplements, pills, or drinks. One commonality with fad diets that I find is that oftentimes they originate with maybe 1 or 2 studies, or maybe just a little small kernel of truth, and then the diet program or the book has kind of extrapolated a whole plan from that little bit of truthful information. And I find that it doesn't often equate with life, with sustained weight loss over time, or they put too much faith into that one little kernel of truth. Probably the biggest issue that I have with fad dieting is that we get into this cycle where we start with a diet program, and in the beginning we're really excited and we're really motivated, and we adhere to the list of good foods and we avoid the list of bad foods. Sometimes we're kind of white-knuckling it through that, right? That might last a few weeks. And typically we see weight loss during this time period, maybe pretty quick weight loss. But for most of us, something in our life happens. We go to a party, we have our birthday, something happens that we maybe overeat, or we eat some of the foods on the bad list. And we kind of have a binge moment there. And the result of that often is negative feelings. We feel shameful, we feel stressed, we feel like a failure, and just totally go off the diet for a while. And so I see people go on this cycle where they're repeating this over and over and over. And there's some interesting studies that suggest perhaps this contributes to weight gain over time, and specifically weight gain in the midsection, which is more harmful for our health. So I don't like diet programs that get us into that cycle, because I truly believe, as a wellness dietitian who helps people with weight loss all of the time, that a successful program for weight loss and health is something that you can realistically sustain. In the United States in 2018, for many of us, overweight and obesity is something that we have to consistently fight against because we have so much food available to us all of the time. We have an abundance of calories in our environment that are so tempting to eat, and we don't have to move a whole lot in our work and in our leisure time. That weight gain is really just a struggle for most of us. So whatever eating program or plan that you adhere to, even if it is one of these fad diets, it needs to be something that you can think, I can realistically sustain this for weeks, really months, maybe even years, as I continue to focus on maintaining a healthy weight and being healthy. So let's shift now into 3 of these fad diets that I'm going to pick on. The first one is the Whole30. And so to prepare for this, I read the Whole30 book. This is a really popular diet right now. It was developed in 2009 by Melissa and Dallas Hartwig. Dallas is a physical therapist, and he and his wife opened up a gym and started doing athletic coaching, and then they also started doing some nutrition counseling and coaching. And so they started to implement these diet changes with their clients, and then they went on to write a book, and now it's a whole, they don't run their gym anymore. They run the Whole30 franchise. So this diet is based on tenets of the paleo diet. The paleo diet is a diet that promotes eating like our ancestors did before the advent of agriculture 10,000 years ago. All right, it's like a hunter-gatherer type of diet. The Hartwigs wrote this book. It starts with food, which outlines the Whole30 eating plan and presents a lot of testimonials and research behind the diet. Some of the health claims that they outline in the book is that the Whole30 diet improves your metabolism, heals the digestive tract, balances the immune system. They say you'll sleep better. They say you'll feel better. You'll have more energy. You'll be happier. They even go as far as saying that it could cure your asthma, your seasonal allergies, even things like tendinitis. So they have a lot of claims to back up their diet plan. The Whole30 is really meant to be a nutritional reset. The name implies 30, that represents 30 days. And so this is not a long-term eating plan. The thought behind this is that you eliminate a lot of foods that are common problems for people. You see how you feel and react, and then after the 30 days is over, you can start adding things back to determine if you might have issues with certain foods. And that isn't something that's unheard of. I mean, an elimination diet is a diet type that is often done for people with food allergies when you're trying to figure out, if there's certain food ingredients or problems with foods. So this is kind of like an elimination diet. There's a list of foods that you can eat, which are on the right, and then there are a list of foods that you can't eat there on the left. So it's like paleo, but it's even more strict. It's a very strict version of paleo. Some of the pros behind the Whole30 diet that I identified by reading the book. First, the diet encourages eating whole foods, foods closer to their original source. It eliminates any processed packaged foods. It wants you to cook your food yourself from fresh ingredients that you go out and get. And that's the type of eating that I encourage my clients to do as well. I can't argue that sugar isn't good for you, added sugar specifically. The diet doesn't prohibit natural sugars from fruits and vegetables, so it does advocate getting rid of added sugars that are, sweeteners that are in our food. It recommends eliminating artificial sweeteners, and most foods with artificial sweeteners like diet sodas aren't good for you anyway in general, don't provide much of a nutritional benefit, so I don't have an objection to cutting those out or reducing them. And I also can see just from a personal level, my experience, that somebody wanting kind of a nutritional reset can be helpful, with the idea that, for 30 days, I'm going to achieve these goals. That's a short enough time. Most people can focus on that. And then if that creates some lasting change, that could be a positive thing. One issue I have with the diet, so I'll get to the cons, is that they don't really outline a clear longevity plan. There isn't a lot of advice for what do you do after the 30 days. In general, they really recommend eating a paleo type diet. So you might have to go buy the paleo book to find out what to do after the whole 30. My biggest issues with whole 30 are, number one, that they eliminate whole grains. I don't have a problem with reducing refined grains from breads and pastas and processed grains, but whole grains like oats, quinoa, barley, brown rice, they recommend eliminating those. And the rationale behind it is that these grains contain a chemical called phytates, or a compound called phytates. And phytates, they label the authors in the book as anti-nutrients because in our digestive tract, phytates bind to minerals, calcium and iron, and keep those minerals from being absorbed in the small intestine. Now, there are phytates in grains. There are also phytates in other foods. There are other substances that affect nutrient absorption found in all kinds of other whole foods. For example, oxalates in vegetables bind to calcium and other types of minerals. So there are so many different things that affect how much nutrient we absorb and the bioavailability of those nutrients in our digestive tract that, to me, the presence of phytates in whole grains isn't an argument to avoid those, okay? We can't avoid everything that might minimize nutrient absorption. Eating a varied diet, whole foods-based diet, should get us enough nutrition to provide calcium and iron and et cetera. So that's their argument, and I'm just not buying that one. Another food group that they eliminate are legumes, also because of the phytates. So legumes are beans and peas. They recommend eliminating peanuts. They group peanuts in the legume category as well. And the rationale behind eliminating peanuts is because a lot of people are allergic to peanuts. But when I did the research, I found that peanut allergy is only present in about 1% of adults. And so to me, the possibility that 1 in 100 people are allergic to peanuts doesn't mean that the other 99 can't eat them and gain some nutritional value from that. Dairy is another food group that Whole30 eliminates, and they recommend that due to casein allergies. Casein's the protein in dairy. Well, casein allergy is about 0.2% of the adult population in the United States, so not a huge problem for most of us. And another reason why they recommend eliminating dairy is because of the presence of hormones in the milk. So there are hormones present in milk of any type that we consume from animals because the animal produces hormones, and some of those are going to get into the milk. Now, there might be a different set of arguments for farming practices that add hormone to encourage more milk production, but the studies on that hormone effect on us do not show a health problem, okay? When we consume hormones, those hormones are proteins, and our stomach denatures those proteins because of the high acid environment. It's the reason why patients on insulin have to inject it. If they took oral insulin, they would digest and break down the proteins in insulin just like we break down other proteins. It's why bodybuilders trying to get muscles inject testosterone, right? If we ingest those hormones, likely our stomach the acid level is breaking those down and denaturing them, and that keeps those hormones in the dairy from being biologically active in our body, and there's no good evidence that they cause us any type of harm. So I disagree with the elimination of dairy for everybody. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. The next diet plan that I'm going to talk about is intermittent fasting. This one has quite a bit of research behind it, so it was really fun to look at all of that. Intermittent fasting is an eating plan where you cycle between periods of time that you eat, which is called the feast, and periods of time that you don't eat, which is the fast. And fasting in different forms has been around for a really long time, and people usually do it in relation to some sort of religious practice or maybe a social or political view expressing that type of view. But today we're seeing people that are fasting in order to see weight loss or health benefits, and so that's what I'm going to talk specifically about. This book, The Fast Diet, came out in 2012 and is written by two British journalists, Michael Mosley and Mimi Spencer. And Mosley does have training as a physician in Europe. This plan recommends 5 days of feasting a week where you don't count calories, you don't measure your food, you just eat however much you want, and then 2 days of fasting. And on the fasting days, you don't abstain from eating 100%. You eat 500 calories a day if you're a woman and 600 calories if you're a man, okay? They say that this diet plan promotes quick weight loss and it promotes more fat loss versus lean tissue loss. They say that it lowers your blood pressure, lowers cholesterol, and improves insulin sensitivity. Now, when I looked at the research, I found that there are a lot of different variations of the intermittent fasting diet plan. Another one that's been looked at somewhat is an alternate day fasting, where you might fast every other day. You have a feast day followed by a fast day, etc. On the fast days in that plan, you're eating 25% of your calorie level, which for the average person would be about 500 calories. Another form is called time-restricted feeding. This is the one that I've had more clients who are trying than the other two. And in time-restricted feeding, you're feasting and fasting within the same day, the same 24-hour period. So for example, you might feast from 8 o'clock in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, then you don't eat after 3 until 8 the next morning. So it's happening in the same day. And the research articles associate these types of plans with weight loss, improved sensitivity, lower blood pressure, and lower appetite. And interestingly, one study I read took a group of feast and fasters, the ones that the ones that were doing the time-restricted feeding in one day, and compared it to a group that was eating the same amount of calories but not paying attention to the timing of those. And they found that the ones doing the fasting reported a decreased appetite compared to the ones that were eating whenever they wanted, despite the fact that they were all eating the same caloric level. So there may be something in that eating pattern that promotes satiety. That needs to be looked at a little more. Some of the pros with intermittent fasting that I identified is that calorie restriction every single day to lose weight is often difficult for people to sustain, and fasting on certain days creates that same calorie restriction, but it seems like it's easier for people to stick with it because I think people can, it's a shorter term goal, right? Like, if I can get through today and only eating 500 calories because tomorrow I know I can eat what I want. So maybe there's something going on, psychologically there. One of the really interesting things that the studies found is that this fourth point, it does not lower your metabolic rate. So one issue with weight loss, especially on low-calorie plans, is that we see a seemingly permanent metabolic rate decrease. Your metabolic rate is how many calories you burn every day. And we've seen people who've lost a lot of weight, their metabolic rate drops, and it's lower when you compare it to somebody who maybe's always been at that weight. So that means it's harder for the person who's lost weight to keep it off long term. They have to eat less. So people who lose weight with intermittent fasting do not have that same metabolic drop. And the claim in the research is that about 90% of the weight loss is fat versus only 10% coming from lean tissue, compared to 75% fat loss and 25% lean tissue loss in low-calorie diets. So there seems to be some sort of connection between the type of weight loss, and then that affects metabolic rate and could potentially affect your ability to maintain your weight loss over time. We don't want people losing lean tissue when they're losing weight. We want them losing fat. Some of the cons with this diet plan, if you are, hopefully you're an exerciser, but if you're an exerciser, some side effects were, just low blood sugar and feeling weak or not, less energetic for exercise. So if you are an exerciser, you might look at doing the same day fasting and then timing your fast for, like if you ate after you exercised and then fasted after that. Because it'd be hard to exercise and then not eat to refuel protein and carbohydrate and the nutrients that you've lost during exercise and then having a long fast. So it would be more about timing when you're exercising and when you're feasting and fasting to make that a little easier. It's really not recommended for patients with diabetes. In the studies that I read, those patients tended to have some extreme lows that caused problems with managing the disease. And then I also read some information that it's difficult for people who are snacky, who like to graze kind of and eat, every 2 or 3 hours. That can be a big change. The last diet I'm going to talk about is the ketogenic diet. And I have done a whole presentation on this. It's one that gets requested a lot with our corporate groups. But a ketogenic diet is a very, very low carbohydrate diet, usually less than 50 grams of carbohydrate a day. Now, to replace those carbohydrates, the diet is pretty high in fat, and it should contain adequate protein. So here's a little breakdown of a standard healthy diet with about 50% of calories coming from carb, 20% coming from protein, and 30% from fat, versus a ketogenic diet, which, is only 5% of calories from carb, 20% from protein, so that stays the same, and 75% from fat. So you hardly eat any carbs, and you replace that with fat. Now, what happens metabolically is that our cells, they like energy from carbohydrate, they use energy from fat, usually both. When you deprive the cells of energy from carbohydrate, they shift to burning more fat for energy. And so that's what happens in the ketogenic diet. There are a lot of theories as to why this diet works, because some of the fat for the cell's energy is coming from your food, but a lot of it's also coming from our stored fat. So you lose weight, and people on the ketogenic diet usually lose weight pretty quickly. In fact, the studies tell us a little faster weight loss versus a low-calorie diet. Now, the longer the diet goes on for, we see less of a difference between that. Long-term weight loss is about the same as somebody on a low-calorie diet. Probably the major issue as to why people lose weight on the ketogenic diet is that when we break down fat for energy, a byproduct of that breakdown is the presence of ketones, ketone bodies. They're just a byproduct of breaking down fat. And those ketone bodies suppress the appetite. So people on a ketogenic diet often are not hungry, or they're just not as hungry as they would on a more standard diet. My husband's been doing ketogenic diet for a year, and here's his testimonial. One person, he's lost 60 pounds, but the most remarkable thing to me is that he isn't very hungry. I mean, he eats meals, but he just doesn't eat as much because he doesn't feel hungry. So if you're going to follow a ketogenic diet, really the only thing you have to pay attention to is the carbohydrate content of the diet, and you would look at that on the nutrition label to be able to identify that pretty easily. There are apps that you can use to help you identify carbohydrate count and keep track of that throughout the day. You're going to be eating foods in this right-hand column. And for most people on a ketogenic diet, they really have to focus on adding fat, because you don't want to necessarily, you don't want to be starving yourself by dropping those carbs. You want to replace those calories with fat. And so that usually means that you're looking for types of fats that you can add to the diet. And I encourage focusing on healthier sources of fats, like plant oils and nuts and seeds and avocados and things like that. You're not eating stuff in the left-hand column. So you see there's some healthy foods in there that you're not eating a whole lot of. I encourage clients that are on the ketogenic diet, and my husband, to make sure that those 50 grams of carb that they're eating are coming from these healthy, high-fiber sources instead of junk. The research on the ketogenic diet and weight loss does show that ketogenic dieters tend to lose more fat in the belly section, so that's a good thing. We also see better results on the ketogenic diet for men. Women lose weight too, but men especially seem to respond to this dietary pattern and lose more belly fat. It does promote a decreased level of triglycerides. Triglycerides are free fat that are in the blood. We know high levels of triglycerides are associated with heart disease. And it seems kind of strange that eating more fat would result in lower triglycerides, but yet that's what the studies tell us that the ketogenic diet can obtain. We see higher levels of healthy cholesterol, HDL, improved blood glucose, improved insulin sensitivity. The cons. One of the cons that I didn't put up there is in some people, LDL cholesterol will go up slightly. Most patients, LDL stays about the same, but in some people it goes up. So if you have high LDLs, this may not be the right type of diet for you, or you may need to have those monitored frequently as you go through the diet. Another side effect is when you initially start the ketogenic diet, you have to go through a period of time where you don't feel so great, and that occurs as your body shifts into burning more fat. And they call this the keto flu. It usually happens within the first week or so of the diet. It lasts 3 or 4 days, and you just feel like you have the flu. You don't have the flu, but you feel tired and kind of your brain's foggy, low energy, etc. Probably the biggest con to the ketogenic diet, and this is documented in the literature, is it's hard to stick with. We don't have a lot of studies on the ketogenic diet long term, and that's because the subjects drop out. So that's important to consider, because I told you that the most important thing about a dietary pattern that you're adopting is that you're able to stick with it long term. I know people who have stuck with this type of diet plan long term. I really think as a dietitian, my biggest challenge is matching individuals with dietary patterns that are going to work for them. So I'm not saying that this wouldn't work for everybody with any of these diets, but that's one of the issues, is that it can be hard to say, you're never going to eat a whole lot of birthday cake or pizza or potato chips for a long, long time. Now, a recent study that got a lot of media attention reported a 4-year decrease in life expectancy with people who adhered to a low carbohydrate diet long term. So that's important to consider. I mean, a 4-year decrease in life expectancy is pretty significant. This was a population-based study, not experimental, so we have to take that into account. It may show an association, but we don't for sure understand the cause of that, or if very low carb diets cause decrease in life expectancy. I also want to point out that obesity causes, on average, an 8-year decrease in life expectancy, and so then we're weighing the risk. That's what my husband came home and he was really concerned about that. He had heard that on the news, and so I said, well, when you were 60 pounds heavier, there were life expectancy decreasing risks there too. So you have to kind of weigh all that out. So in conclusion, my bottom line is that consistency is key. When we're trying to eat healthy, when we're trying to achieve our wellness goals, when we're trying to lose weight, the people that are most successful are those that for most days out of the week or the month, you're eating healthy foods, you're eating the right amount of foods, you're getting your exercise in and working toward those goals. That might not mean that weight loss happens really fast, but I'm looking at consistency over time. So if a fad diet or a popular diet can help you achieve that consistency, and it doesn't seem to be, terribly dangerous, I don't have a problem with it. I really don't. I try to match people with dietary patterns that are going to work for them individually. I do always look as if it's recommending high-quality, nutrient-dense foods as well, because that's very important for nutrition intake. Now, my favorite diet book, and one that I recommend to clients, in fact, I've even built weight loss programs for some of our corporate clients around this, is Yoni Friedhoff's Diet Fix. He says this is the non-diet or anti-diet diet book. He runs a non-surgical bariatric clinic in Ottawa, Canada, and he is just a really excellent expert. He has a blog that I subscribe to, and I love to read his insights and thoughts because he has a tremendous amount of experience, and I really like his perspective on sustainable weight loss. And so this book outlines a strategy for really kind of changing the way we think about food. So it's maybe a little more mindful eating based, shifting to thinking of food as nourishing, shifting to what we see as success on a weight loss plan, you know, as far as quick weight loss or how much weight we lose, and setting up maybe more realistic expectations for what we're doing. So this is my favorite one if you're looking for something new to read. Can you guys think of any questions that you have or comments? Insights? All right, well, thank you. I have my contact information up here if you are interested in copies of the slides or want to send me more information or even ideas for future wellness presentations. We're always excited to hear your ideas, so you can come get that.